Hello everyone, it's lovely to see you here and welcome to the 2026 DICE annual lecture. For people who don't know, I am Bob Smith, I'm the director of DICE, and it's, as I always say, fantastic to see so many new people and so many old friends and some really, really new friends. I think this is the youngest we've had someone at a DICE talk, so it's lovely to see a very broad range of ages here. So in terms of the talk today, I'm going to start off by giving an overview of what we've been doing in DICE for the last year. Then Professor Nathalie Pettorelli will give her lecture. Then we'll have a Q&A with the audience. We'll give out our annual prize awards for students and staff. And then we'll finish by Professor Glyn Davis as kindly giving the vote of thanks. So, yes. What is DICE? So DICE was founded in 1989, so the Durrell Institute of Conservation and Ecology, and through that long history we focused on conservation that has an impact, working with people and building capacity all around the world. And because of that work in 2019 we were awarded a Queen's Anniversary Prize. More recently, in 2022, we were recognised as a university institute, and we joined the School of Natural Sciences in 2025. So there are some infographics about us. Marvellously, I got to fill in a big country this year with someone from Angola. I don't know whether Anna's in the room, joining us. So the map is looking even more coloured in. And we now have more than 2,000 alumni. For the DICE staff, there they all here, which again I think is the most we've ever had. So it's been a really flourishing few years, and we've got this excellent team of staff, supported by the DICE Advisory Board. So this is a group of a dozen senior conservation people from government, NGOs and the private sector who provide a lot of help and support, including Glyn, who chairs that in an amazing way and very successful way. Just wanted to, I think a lot of you know this sad news already, but Sir Robert Worcester, Bob Worcester, who died last year and was the University of Kent Chancellor, he was a long and loyal member of the DICE Advisory Board too. So he was an amazing man. Weirdly, he was my sister's boss at the beginning of her career. So he set up Mori, the polling company, which was Ipsos Mori as it's become. So yes, was amazingly insightful about public opinion and political attitudes, but also had a real love of nature. And because of that, yes, was very happy to be an advisory board member. And the Worcester Prize that we give every year for the best undergraduate student is in, he founded that 10, 12 years ago now. So we will remember him through that for the coming years. So in terms of our events each year, so the DICE annual lecture is the highlight of the year, but we also have a set of great monthly talks, the DICE talks every month. So if you're not signed up to the email list and you'd like to be, please go to that page. You'll obviously Google it, I'm not expecting anyone to write it down, and sign up and you'll find out about all the events that are happening here. So the other sort of highlight of our year is the BioBlitz. So these have been running now for 5-6 years. And the 2025 one was another great success. So we had 150 volunteers and members of the public out there collecting data and recording 312 species. There are all the staff and, well, mostly students in their blue T-shirts who are running it all and doing an amazing job. And because of that, yes, we now, over 1,500 species have been recorded on campus, which is a testament to both the BioBlitzes and the whole set of people. So I did the screenshot today. So we have people on campus who can tell the difference between a hybrid of an ant, which I was properly impressed by. So the fact that in particular the students are doing an amazing job of throughout the year collecting more data too. And the 2026 BioBlitz is going to be 30th of May. So please come along. There's There'll be publicity about it soon, so please come along and sign up and be part of that great event. In terms of research, again, it's been a really good year. So we've published lots of work. I've just highlighted here some of the ones in the sort of high-impact journals that illustrates the range of work that we're doing. And another thing that you can do, so Hannah Rost, our brilliant events and social media person, has set up the Research at Dice newsletter on LinkedIn. So if you're on LinkedIn, please follow that, because you'll get to see. So there's been 2 newsletters so far that, again, has highlighted the range of work that we're doing, from cute mammal stuff to broader ecosystem and policy level work. That, it's a great way of finding out what we've been doing. And some of that research has been covered in the press. Nat Salonka was on the Gardener's World podcast, interviewed by Monty Don, which, for some people would be a career highlight. Sorry, there's, noise of recognition from the older members of the audience. Really nice to see all of that from the BBC to the Daily Mail. In terms of our students, so we were fortunate enough a couple of years ago, through the generosity of the Not So Warm Sands Foundation, in memory of Charles Burnett III, to receive funding for a set of master scholarships for people from the Kasa region. And the photo on the left shows the first year of people receiving the scholarship, and then on the right is them about a year later graduating. I should point out that Willem in the coat also graduated. It's just he couldn't make it to graduation. But yes, it was really nice to see those fantastic students progressing. And in the room this evening, we've got some of the current Burnett scholars and a photo of Annabelle Falcon, who's done an amazing job of managing that process. So we've just closed applications for the 3rd year of the scholarships and had 300 people apply. So Annabelle's been going through all those applications now, and we'll be doing some shortlisting soon. So that continues to be, incredibly successful scheme. And also through the Leave Hume Trust, through a grant that Zoe Davies brought in, we've had funding for a whole set of PhD students and master's scholarships too. Our alumni, so Rachel Ikeme, who actually was funded through a scholarship 15 years ago now. It probably has been that long. So she's an amazing conservation scientist based in Nigeria, who's won various awards, including a Whitley Award, and she's just got a Rolex Award, which, you get a Rolex, and you also get some money to support her conservation work. So, she's almost single-handedly an incredibly difficult situation, supported community conservation in Nigeria, has just helped establish a 6,000-hectare community reserve, and has done lots of work, particularly focusing on primates, with the red colobus as one of the key ones. And again, one of the important parts of our work at the moment is the Sharing Space for Nature project, which is started in August 1st, 2024, and has £8.3 million grant that's is one of the main reasons for our expansion and having so many great new staff. So that focuses on work both locally in East Kent and in Southeast England, and internationally, looking at new types of conservation area for meeting global biodiversity targets. So we've done a huge amount of different things as part of that, but in the last year, in terms of outward-facing events, we had a really successful East Kent Conservation Research Symposium, so that was last December, and this will be something that we'll run in future years as well. So please, if you're interested in conservation, look out for that. Brought together all the people doing conservation work in the region, and was, a brilliant success with a really nice range of talks, and really helpful for networking and understanding what's going on in the region. And then we also had the Spatial Nature Planning Forum. So this is, again, will be an annual event bringing together decision makers who use spatial data for conservation. So we had a sort of small initial meeting last year. The next one is in a couple of weeks, and we've already got double the number of people attending, which is fantastic. And the idea is to use the academic jargon, a community of practice of all the people who do this types of spatial planning so that we can get together and work out what everyone's doing and the best way forward. And a key part of all of that work is looking at work at the broader scale. So there's a big focus on rewilding and a big focus on the sort of spatial planning at the ecosystem level, which is why we were delighted that Nathalie agreed to give the 2026 annual lecture today. So please, Nathalie, welcome you to the stage.
Hello. Thank you very much for coming here. It's a real pleasure to be here and to be invited, so thank you. Also for giving you a Friday evening. I'm not sure whether it was worse, hopefully. Today I'm going to talk to you about ecosystems. And it's the first time I'm doing these talks because I've been asked whether I'm just recycling old material. No, you're the first one to see this hugely new brand presentations, hopefully. So I don't need to set you the concept, but the context, but I always want to set the context because to me that's what triggers science right now in terms of why we need to move fast now. We are facing incredibly rapid environmental change. And change in itself is not bad. But when it's happening very fast, it makes it very difficult to protect people, nature, anything, particularly the vulnerable component of systems. And in this case, it's not just one crisis we are facing. We have very rapid change in climatic condition, which goes from temperature to phenology to ice sheets diminishing and sea level rise, concentration of gas in the atmosphere changing. We're also facing a biodiversity crisis, as you all know, and then you have an invasive and a pollution crisis, health crisis. So you've got a lot of things coming up at the same time. And this is posing increasing risk to humanity. And this is not in the future, it's right now. We can talk about the recent decision to literally remove people from their home because their home is not safe to be lived in because of flooding. This is happening in this country right now, and this is just the start. And what's interesting and it's increasingly appreciated is that those crises, they are interlinked. They reinforce each other. They are intertwined. So if you think about, for example, climate change, it's impacting wildlife, whether it's creating local extinction, sometimes extinction altogether, although not that much reported right now, but also looking at species moving around to try to track their optimal condition. And that means the reorganization of ecosystems and sometimes creating vulnerability in ecosystems. At the same time, this loss of biodiversity is reducing our ability to cope with the climate change crisis that we are facing through mitigation problem, the fact that we are sequestering less carbon, but also through adaptation. Nature has less propensity to help us cope with rapid change in climatic condition. And so it goes to the point where nature, and not just tree, is really important to face the climate change crisis that we are facing. And as is, in general, being important for meeting the sustainable development goal, as well as human health and as well as well-being. So we are in a situation where increasingly policy recognize that nature protection and recovery is a priority. So what do we do in the space of nature recovery? So if you look at what are the common options, you get quite some discussion around wildlife-friendly agriculture, around species-based intervention, saving something somewhere. You get a lot of discussion around protected area expansion, the 30 by 30. and as well as improve management, recognizing that it's not just about how many protected species, protected area you have, but whether they are well managed or not. You try to restore habitat, thinking a lot of focus on tree right now, but also peatlands. And then you get more and more discussion on land use prioritization and this famous concept of multifunctional landscape, which nobody can really define, but everybody loves it. But what it boils down to is that when it comes to narrative about nature recovery, we are primarily talking about species. And actually, a lot of people, that's what they understand when we talk about nature recovery. And not so much about ecosystem. Now, you might disagree with this, and so I'm going to make the case for that. If I start by the bottom, I would say that whenever I talk to people about ecosystem, I get 3 different responses. One is some people tell me it literally doesn't exist. It's a fictional thing, which can be just boiled down to a list of species. And if you know all the species in the stuff, you know the ecosystem, so what's the point of having the concept of ecosystem? I have people that tell me it's like habitat, really. So why are we making the fuss? Because we're working with habitat, so clearly we're working with ecosystems, so there's no discussion. And then the third one knows that ecosystem exists, but literally it's too complex. Can't do anything about it, can't understand it, we can't really factor that in. That's all good, but is it really true? The word ecosystem, the concept of ecosystem, is 90 years old. Well, it was last year. It's just 91 now. It was introduced by a guy called Arthur Tansley, which is also the guy that created the British Ecological Society. And he, I can give you the scientific definition, complex plant, blah, blah, functional unit, etc. But what stays with me is that he positioned that this is the basic unit of nature. That's the thing that we should all focus on. And he was quite adamant on it at a time where there was a lot of discussion as to what are systems or things connected, etc. Now, 91 years on, ecosystem is actually a fundamental concept in policy. Read the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Ecosystem is a pillar concept. Talk about the UNCCD or the UNFCCC, and you will see that anything that is being talked about nature is actually about ecosystem functioning or ecosystem services delivery. That is, the delivery of services given by ecosystems. So basically, if you want to unify all the agenda in the environmental space, the common denominator factor, the only common denominator factor, is ecosystem. At the same time, it's recognized as fundamental. It's really big in policy. But when you look into the science, it's a bit interesting what people talk, or whether they talk or not about it. And then when you go to national legislation, such as England, such as the UK, basically look at the Environmental Act and the target, there is no mention of ecosystem. So let's see whether we really don't know anything about ecosystem. I would agree, 90 years ago, yes, we didn't know that much. I mean, it was a really cool concept, and when I was doing my PhD, actually, when I was doing my master, I had someone that kept on talking about ecosystem. I just loved this idea that something can be bigger than the sum of its components. I mean, it's a fascinating concept when you think about it. But beyond that, there wasn't that much. And there were different typology, none of which really functional, but much more a bit like the land cover or the habitat. That is, people thinking, well, that looks like a unit. I'm not totally sure, but should be one. And then it's only in 2020, actually a little bit earlier, but formally adopted and published in 2022, I think, that we got a first functional typology of ecosystem. That is the first time that we articulated how many different types of ecosystem there are, and not based on what we look at, but how it functions. And so it was articulated by David Keith, which is also one of the key persons between the red list of ecosystem, which I'll mention later on. But basically, he developed a typology, which was based on how systems deal with various resources and environmental conditions, the ambient environment, as well as global activity, to organize itself in some in type of biotic interaction and deal with disturbance regime in such a way that ecosystem properties are starting to emerge. And this typology was the first time that we really thought about what's the functioning of ecosystem as opposed to just what it looks like. This typology was then meant to be scalable because there are things that vary a bit. So we can, if you look at the hierarchy of that typology, you can see that some things, they are found everywhere, and then there might be some regional variation, but they are globally, they are found. And then some others are only found in some specific place. And then within this, you might have some tailoring as to local condition and how it works exactly. And the point of that typology was to account for it so that whatever scale you're looking at, whatever system you're looking at, you can take into account those peculiarities, but still retaining that overall functional description. And this gave rise to two things. First, it supported the red list of ecosystems. So if you know the red list, it's the thing that tells you whether a species is doing well, not so well, critically endangered, not doing well, etc. So the idea was to do exactly the same for ecosystem, where, well, ecosystems don't die, they collapse, which means that they become something else. And so the maximum risk is an ecosystem that is collapsed. And then from then on, you can go into critical and endangered and stuff, etc. What's funny is that that approach to assessing the vulnerability of an ecosystem was developed before the typology. And it's only when that was developed, people realized that they needed a better typology than the one that existed so far. And then that gave rise to the Global Ecosystem Atlas, which is a current initiative by the Global Earth Observation, GEO, to try to map ecosystem all over the world. And I think they have mapped something like 60-something%, trying to start to have maps. So, you know, quite a bit that we know. Other stuff that we know, from the work of NOS in the 90s, we know that biodiversity dimensions tend to be organized by structure, composition, and functioning. And this is the case for ecosystem. The thing that is quite funny is when you start to get into the detail of what those words mean. So composition, a lot of people think, oh yeah, it's just species richness. But work has shown that it's not just about how many species you have. It's also functional diversity, phylogenetic diversity, turnover. So all of that goes into the composition bit. Then you get the structure. Again, it looks easy to start with, but actually you can think structure vertically, so canopy complexity or variability. You can think horizontally, which is about fragmentation metrics. And then you can think about structural components. So for example, you might have a water of body and how they are distributed. And then you get the world of function. I think that's one of my favorites because ecosystem functioning seems intuitive, but there is quite a lot of different functions that an ecosystem provides. From the provisioning one, which is food, raw material, shade, shelter, etc., whether it's regulation, nutrient, climate, disturbance, water, or whether it's supporting, providing habitat, pollination, barrier effect, etc. And so far, there is not a complete consensus, but I would say that most people would agree that there's at least 18 different functions. So when you say, my ecosystem is functioning, you're going to need to be a bit more precise. Functioning how, what, where. And then within this, we have general, sometimes confusion, or at least not a proper articulation, sometimes of the difference between ecosystem function and ecosystem services delivery, which sometimes get mixed, as it gets mixed with ecological processes and ecosystem processes. But basically, there's a proportion of those services that interest humanity, and then another proportion of those services that matter to everyone, including humanity. We also know that ecosystems are, as I was saying, bigger than the sum of their parts, which means that they have emergent properties. So far, although there will always be discussion in scientific circles, there is 8 properties that are generally singled out. Hierarchy, the fact that there are different levels of organization, heterogeneity, self-organization, it's organized itself, openness, adaptation, can adapt to different change, memory, it comes back to stuff that he has done before. Non-linearity, doesn't systematically react linearly to a situation, and uncertainty being those 8. They also follow rules. So some of them we start to have an idea. So for example, allometric scaling is being one. It's the fact that in ecosystem, the biological traits change non-linearly with body size. The other one that is, you might have not heard, but it would be very easy to think about, is ecological autocatalysis, which means that they organize, a system organized in such a way that it reinforces itself through positive circular interaction that benefit the whole system. And there's also the maximum power principle, which means that ecological systems maximize their use of total energy, transformation and use. What's interesting, though, is that we're just starting to learn about those rules. There's a world to do into understanding what are those rules, those things that really characterize ecosystem. And one of them has been proposed and validated to date relatively recently, so I thought I'll talk to you about that. And it's called the ecological equation of state. Why do I think this is fantastic? It's because well, it blew my mind. I don't know what it will do to you. But if you think about physics and complex system, there is an equation that tells you whether a system is stable or not, which is the ideal gas law, PV equal nRT. I'm guessing many people have seen that if you've done physics. It's basically a relationship between pressure, volume, number of mole of gas, an ideal gas constant, R, and the absolute temperature. And the idea of ecological equation of state that maybe ecosystems follow principles that are just like those seen in physics system. Blow your mind, blew my mind. Meaning that there might be some relationship that links some deeply integrated measurement of ecosystem. And the one that has been proposed by Hart 3 or 4 years ago now postulates that there is a relationship between biomass, richness, productivity, and abundance. And what's really cool about it, it says that if that relationship goes out of stability, or if it's not equilibrated, balance, then you get into trouble. And so what we did recently was to test that. So there was a data set in the US where, you know, all the species of tree, all the biomass, could estimate productivity through satellite remote sensing, and you could have access to abundance. And what we did was to just see whether those 4 things were related together, and where was it that it wasn't balanced. And what we found is that the more, if you compare the deviation to that equation in protected area, non-protected area, and partially protected area, you have a significant effect. That is, in protected area, that balance is more maintained than in others. What does it mean more concretely is that you can tell the health of an ecosystem not by looking at millions of stuff, but just by going at 4 variables and whether or not they are balanced. Which, if it works, would be an incredible way to think about degradation without having to know a lot of stuff about things that are quite difficult to access to. Of course, it needs more testing, but it's really to tell you that there is a huge field of development in trying to understand those properties, those rules that ecosystems follow. Ecosystems are not static. Like most complex systems, they're constantly into a dynamics. And they move from a growing phase, where they exploit resources, to a climate state where it's the maximum use of energy, maximum complexity, etc. And if the disturbance hit, they have this release phase where, well, things get all over wacky a bit. And then they need to reorganize to then go back into re-exploitation. Here, what I wanted you to look at is that whenever we think about restoration in the classical way of thinking about it, we tend to react very quickly to a disturbance by trying to bring it as quickly as possible into the climax state. But there is other way to manage system. One way can just let the whole system go through its natural cycle. The other one is literally to see whether it would be better off that the system move into another type of ecosystem, because it simply is not viable in the current condition. We also know finally that ecosystems are quite connected. And the system, the realm where this has been particularly well shown is the marine system, where the connection between your reef, your seagrass meadow, and your kelp forest has been shown to create functional connection as well as structural connection that makes the functioning of those ecosystems dependent on each other. But there are some really cool terrestrial examples too, notably the Arctic system that are dependent from migration by geese, as they produce a lot of energy that sustain those ecosystems and some of its parts because of big migration. So if I summarize where I'm going with this, last point. Does it actually work to think about ecosystem when we think about ecosystem recovery? Do we have any example of people actually working at ecosystem, and what's been the outcome so far? There's not that much, but whenever you look at it, it looks good. In the UK, for example, some work in the Lime Bay, and a lot of those examples come from freshwater, which you would expect because freshwater systems are so connected to different types of ecosystems. So taking the whole system into account really help with management. And in those systems, they really showed that it does better than, for example, setting up a special area of conservation. It really has a lot of impact going from water quality, fish population, diversity, as well as bringing benefits to people. And then in Scotland, they really showed how this was better at addressing a pollution crisis by really coordinating at the ecosystem level. So if I summarize, actually we have definitions that are scalable of ecosystem. We have a typology that can be applicable everywhere and is functionally based on how things work. We have methods and data to map and monitor ecosystem. We have some idea about the principle and the rules that underpin their dynamic. And we have evidence that ecosystem approach work on the ground. But most importantly, we have policy appeal, because right now, ecosystems are more and more talked into various policy settings. So you might say that it's time to factor in ecosystem. And I had this great question today about the fact that 20 plus more years ago, it was actually advocated by the CBD that we should do ecosystem. And someone asked me, it didn't work then, why would it work now? And that's the answer, because all of that is in place, which wasn't in place 20 plus years ago. The data, the knowledge, the characterization, all of that has advanced quite a lot for the past 20 plus years. So why would you, what would be the consequence of factoring in ecosystem? So first, you would really help aligning agenda. And that's the problem that we have right now. So think about internationally. You have one convention, the Convention of Biological Diversity, that tells people to do one thing. Then you have the UNFCCC that says, no, for climate you need to do all of that. Then you have the UNCCD that says, actually, have you thought about that? And so the problem is that there's a lot of people asking for the same information sometimes, for related information. And that lack of aligning the strategy makes it very difficult to have a solution that is integrated. Because you bring things together, you could save you quite a lot of money from reducing the reporting cost, thinking about intervention that benefit more than one species. You could also start to have some positive communication about what you do at the species level. So if you think about a lot of intervention and management decisions, they are about helping that species do better. But when do you stop? And when do you know whether, will you ever stop? Is it always, we're going to push at it? Is it self-sustainable? Does it integrate? Does it make a difference to the overall system? If you start to consider the overall system, those discussions and trade-off about what you should do where start to have a context where you can have meaningful engagement with all the stakeholders in that system. You can also start to plan and have narratives that put people in nature. Because in ecosystem perspective, people are always in. Whether they drive the system, they are participants in it, however it is, it's a system that integrates all components, because all components participate to some extent in being greater than the sum of their parts. And so that is quite a good narrative for developing and articulating a relationship with nature. Now, you might ask me how we do that. And I'd say there's 4 points that I think are quite important. The first one is really to standardize and align ecosystem monitoring frameworks. That is, starting to be clear on what it is, what do we do, how we do it, and then talk to the stakeholders that need to be talked to, whether it's convention, whether it's national agency, whether it's local nature recovery, about what you're doing, why and how does it work. You make use of this perspective to put nature in more than the nature agenda, if it makes sense. So if you think about the UK, whenever you say nature, they say Defra. Yeah, but it's not just Defra. Actually, it's also DESNES. It's also the household one. It's anyone that does anything. It's the infrastructure. As soon as you're dealing in the environment, nature should be part of decision making. And so having a concept that articulates that is really helpful. It provides you with a way to integrate the species and ecosystem perspective. And I think we're going to need to do that to really show that this is not about one versus the other, but together, and that they bring synergies and a lot of benefits when you consider both. And also start to talk about the risk that ecosystem changes pose to people. So starting with the ecosystem monitoring frameworks. I think one thing that we might start to have discussion in the UK in particular is this land cover habitat ecosystem. For the moment, the UK, and actually most of the 188 signatories to the Global Biodiversity Framework, have no idea what ecosystem they have. They haven't mapped it. They haven't done the job. They know, some knows land cover, some knows habitat, but very few actually know what ecosystem they have. And if you don't know what you have, and if you don't know what their extent is or their conservation status, it becomes really difficult to manage it nationally, locally, and internationally. This is why we need standardized definition and methods, but also this is why we all need to do it to start to be a little bit more clearer. It also provides an opportunity for doing so to actually reconcile what we have. A lot of people think that if you suddenly move to the ecosystem, you're going to have to start from scratch. No. Actually, to map your ecosystem, you already have a lot of those information. It's about looking at your habitat map, because they do matter for mapping ecosystem, but also looking at species distribution map, looking at interaction, at topography, at climatic condition, and then integrate all of that into knowing where your ecosystem here are. And if we were to do that, suddenly this would really help with boosting the ecosystem science, something we really need to do. And I'll come to that later. Doing that could be really powerful for integrating nature in policy tools. So if you think about, again, the Rio Convention, so that's the the biodiversity one, the climate one, and the UNCCD one, they all require governments, parties, to develop plans, whether it's the nationally determined contribution, which is about how you're going to reduce climate change, the national adaptation plan, which is how you're going to protect your people from the impact of climate change, and the MBSAP, which are the strategy for an action plan for biodiversity. But that's not the only place where we actually need to know and coordinate for developing an ecosystem approach. There is marine strategies. There is resilience strategy. There's the land use framework, which is currently being developed, not with much consideration for ecosystem. There's a biodiversity net gain, if you think about it. If you knew where you do your biodiversity net gain and whether or not it influences the risk of collapse of an ecosystem, wouldn't that be useful? And then your local national recovery strategy. Because again, if you factor in ecosystem, you can start to have discussion as to why this matter and that matter with respect to the functioning of systems that directly deliver for people. And then if you do that, you can also ensure that those are supportive. For the moment, all those commitments are delivered by different groups in different government departments without much talking between them. So if you have a common denominator and common maps and common information, you can factor them in systematically in the same place in all of them and make sure that the strategies don't confront or literally erase each other. And this could then help for protected area designation and management. As I said, the local natural recovery strategy, it could help with how to build national resilience, as well as implementation of all the kind of activities that governments are trying to do when it comes to nature recovery. And that could then be used, if we were all to do that, to increase coherence among the different nations within the UK or around continents, for example. When I actually produce a report, sorry, completely dry some months ago about why we needed an ecosystem perspective. And I got a lot of feedback, some quite positive, some not so, about people telling me, how dare do you push for ecosystem? Surely you know that this will harm species conservation. Surely you know that this will directly hamper our ability to deliver on the Environment Act. Pushing for an ecosystem perspective doesn't mean that I don't recognize, or anyone that wrote that report, or more generally people that want this, that they do not see the value of a species perspective. It's not because you say that this is important that you don't recognize that that is important. If anything, it says that you probably need both to make better decisions. So think about it. You can make decisions for the ecosystem that are not good for some species. And that's the risk that they are worried about. And that's a fair risk and a fair concern. But similarly, you can make a lot of bad decisions at the species level that will completely fuck up your ecosystem. And we're not talking about that either. So if we don't talk about it, we'll never be able to talk about those trade-offs and how we deal about it. One example that always sticks to me is the owl in the US. I don't know whether you heard about it. You know, those old forests in the US. And then there's this owl that everybody loves. But this owl is really not doing well with climate change. And so a lot of money is spent into trying to save that specific owl. Now, another type of owl is actually doing quite well with climate change. It's coming slowly, going into where the other owl is. And then governments have been spending millions trying to kill the one that can do to save the one that can't do. And it's a fair question to ask whether that's a clever idea. Whether you can systematically try to maintain something you love so much, even though from a climate perspective, it's not going to happen. And if we don't have those perspectives, the species, and it's fair concern to think that you also need to care about that, the owl species. But is it the best way to care about it by trying to maintain it in an environment where it's not doing so well? So when you have both perspectives, you can actually have those discussions. If you just see it through one lens, you can never have those discussions. In my view, rewilding provides a really interesting opportunity to have those discussions. First of all, because with rewilding, everybody is used now to tension, discussion, drama. So why not put more drama? But also mostly because of what rewilding is about. So rewilding is about bringing an ecosystem by reinstating those natural processes to make those functionally degraded ecosystems more ecologically complex, less subject to human intervention. So basically, as minimum human intervention as possible in the long term. And this can be done on a continuum, right? It's not you should never do anything, there should be no humans, or it should be managed. It's a continuum. You're trying to move your ecosystem towards a state of increased ecological complexity. Ecological complexity being here not just species richness, but the interaction between things and how things work. And reduce human control. Now, that differs a bit from restoration, as we've discussed before, because you have lower relevance of historical benchmark, lower fidelity to taxonomic precedent. Basically, you look less at how it was before, and you focus a little bit more on whether it works or not. And that makes it an interesting platform, because not only rewilding is about self-sustaining ecosystem, but also about ecological complexity and about species network. So the mandate of rewilding is to not only recreate functional ecosystems that are able to adapt to future climate conditions, but also provide the foundation for the recovery of community and species. Basically, the whole argument captured in one approach. And so it is a good place to start to have those discussions and articulate those relationships between those two perspectives. Another thing that has been coming into the fore recently is the realization by the UK government that ecosystem collapse might just ruin their economy and completely change what happened to people. That report was published some months ago and was basically making the case for an ecosystem approach. What's interesting is that that report came from the Ministry of Defense, not Defra. And it was highly focused on ecosystem outside the UK. So there's still a little bit of step to the realization that those ones can also collapse nationally. But we're getting there. And so here, what was interesting is was the first step, and an important first step. But when you think about it, an ecosystem change can take multiple forms, right? So you can have shift in species interaction. You can have altered disturbance regime, so for example, more fire or more flood. You can have wholesale organization, so an ecosystem changing completely its type, nearly, which might lead to the emergence of a new type of ecosystem. And each of these risks, in a way, pose completely different risk to ecosystem delivery, ecosystem services delivery, and thus to people, of course. On top of that, different ecosystems matter for different people in different places, and they do things at different levels. So if you think about peat bogs, really good for carbon sequestration. Lakes, pretty good for food. Wetlands and forests, good for air quality. And so depending on where you are and which ecosystem you are, the risk that it poses to local community is completely different. If suddenly one change occurs, if it reorganizes, if it collapses, if it gets degraded. And for the moment, we have no idea about those risks. They haven't been systematically and comprehensively assessed. And one would argue that that might need to happen quite soon. So how do we do this? Well, to date, we don't have that many framework for assessing the risk and the vulnerability of ecosystem to global environmental change. We have the red list of ecosystem, which basically required a relatively, not an excellent, but some form of understanding as to how the ecosystem works, because the assessment is based on criteria which are all underpinned by a conceptual framework of how your system works. So some level of understanding is needed. But the marine people have been dealing with a lot of data knowledge gap for a long time, and they have developed way of dealing with ecosystem management when you're not very sure where the ecosystem is, what exactly it is, and how it's functioning. And that gives us the possibility for adaptive approach. Start wherever you can, and then get better as you implement. So what does an ecosystem perspective mean ultimately for ecology and conservation? To me, I think it provides a bunch of radical shift. The first one is to understand that ecosystems are complex systems. Complex system is not just research by ecologists. There's a bunch of people in multiple types of disciplines that are fascinated by complex systems. And we can learn from them, we can work with them, we could do progress by just working and understanding that. So trying to get into those interdisciplinary collaboration and really starting to think as a bottom-up as well as a top-down. So when we think about ecosystem, we kind of take the view that if we know everything that is in the ecosystem, we will understand the ecosystem. No. And there is currently no good model for predicting the behavior of an ecosystem. Primarily, I would say because we have had that bottom-up view. So trying to learn from other disciplines and starting to also think about top-down would be a really good idea. The second stuff is that abiotic matters. A lot of people forget that ecosystem is not just about species in it. It's also about abiotic, about the environment, about geodiversity. something that has started to appear in the literature, but hasn't really been factored in terms of a link with the rest of the component within the ecosystem. The third one is to reposition humanity into nature, as opposed to some stuff outside that may or may not influence, but always badly influence. Nature is the outcome of all of the species, including us. So we need to be in the models, we need to be in the framing, and not just as something that is always bad. A possibility to talk about dynamic. I think when you're facing rapid environmental change, you need to really appreciate this idea that things are not static, which means focusing maybe less on what's in it, but how it functions, and primarily whether or not it's resilient. And resilience, fantastic concept, not exactly advanced in terms of how you do that concretely. So a bunch of research into doing that. Putting nature and climate change in particularly in as a big driver, starting to think about how we're going to design solutions that are fit for the climate we are going to experience, and also being predictive. I put that in because I recently did a workshop between the movement, the Ecology SIG, and the rewilding specialist interest group of the PS. And we were talking from the rewilding perspective, it would be really good to start to have prediction about where animals go if you release them and whether or not they will affect the functioning, etc. And a bunch of people working in movement ecology as Ariana, we don't do prediction. Okay, so we do analysis, but we don't predict. And the general sense that I got in talking more and reading more is that there is a fear of being wrong by doing prediction. If you analyze data, you're never wrong, right? Or at least it's less wrong. But predicting the future, mostly you will have it wrong. But even though you might have it wrong a bit, you might also generate knowledge that would be helpful. So it's a balance between the risk of being wrong and the positive of doing something useful. I think at the moment, we probably need to rebalance that to be a bit more predictive and thinking about what makes us being able to be predictive, which is quite important when you're doing science. To all the early career in the room, I really wanted to make a slide to get you to think about stuff, but to pass you the overall message that there's a bunch of stuff we don't know. And anyone else that tells you the contrary is wrong, which means that we need a lot of that new brain power to answer some really big questions. So for example, how you want to recover nature, you want to make an ecosystem work better, how do you do it? Do we know that? Sometimes we think we do and it doesn't work. So how do you assemble elements so that you get a functioning ecosystem? Novel ecosystem, those new community that are popping up. For the moment, we have no idea whether they lead to changing in functioning and processes. That means that potentially you have a new type of ecosystem appearing, something that the typology hadn't thought about. For the moment, we don't know. Do we know anything about ecological resilience? I would argue, there's quite some work to do into this, because looking at the resilience of one function or one proxy isn't telling you whether an ecosystem is resilient. It just tells you whether a function has been going back to a stuff after a disturbance. That's a very different thing from resilience of a system as a whole. Think about geodiversity and the abiotic. Do we know anything about how that relates to ecosystem resilience? Are there places where ecosystems are sitting on abiotic conditions that make them more resilient? Yes, no, we don't know. What about what shape vulnerability to change? Can we predict which ecosystems are more likely to not do well and where? For the moment, not so much in that. And what about individual variability, plasticity, and resilience? Do we really need to bring those population dynamics concepts into ecosystem resilience, or actually can we do without it? Question that nobody knows at the moment. There are also it's an incredible moment to work in ecosystem because there's huge opportunity. First of all, from the complex science theory, which is starting to really unify different fields and try to highlight some basic principle. So conceptually, really interesting. As we were saying, we're just about to discover new law as to what are the things that shape ecosystem functioning. There is technical opportunity. If you think about digital twins, and quantitative and calculating capability. This has just completely exploded. Data, if you think about all the remote sensing that you can think of, which gives you all kind of information, some species-centric, but some, like the omics, much more integrated, and whether or not we could learn something from that. And basically, of course, there is AI that connects a lot of those opportunities for advancing science. From an ecosystem perspective, for policy would be transformational in my view. It would be the end of silos. So we would finally have people that work and row in the same direction. So coherence among those different targets and less war between different governments and different government departments as to who is the one we should follow. And the end of function-based management, so having gone through the years of let's all do ecosystem services and let's just manage nature just with one service, didn't go so well, I'd say. So might be good to start to have another framework where we just don't focus on one function, but on the system as a whole. A door to proper valuation. For the moment, when you are valuing a place, destroying it always wins economically, because we factor in better the benefits that we have from destruction than we value the benefits that we have from retaining. As long as we don't have a framework to properly assess those benefits, nature will always lose. It will also provide some connection between the national and the international agenda. I think one thing that we see many years now is that you might have big decision in the CBD, it has absolutely no influence nationally, and sometimes there's just not that coherent articulation of where we are going. So it's not just different departments within the nation, it's also having those different layers working together. We would also have an opportunity for more functionalist approach to environmental policy. So if you think about environmental policy, the Habitat Directive, the Bird Directive, whatever, it's always about what's there. It's never about whether it works or not. And the two are important. So for the moment, legislatively, we don't really have a space for doing conservation where we focus also on whether it works or not. And so we really do need to have that option, and an ecosystem perspective really open that door. And finally, it provides an integration framework. So that it always amuses me that we have a marine strategy, but we have a terrestrial strategy, and then there's freshwater that never knows what to do. So it's in the middle. And we don't really integrate, even though a freshwater system is clearly dependent on the terrestrial system. A freshwater clearly influences terrestrial, clearly influences sometimes the marine. So we're losing track of those connections because we work scientifically also in silo. Some final reflection. I'm hoping I'm okay. Yes, okay. I think beyond the scientifically well-explained point, there is something about having a narrative that connects society as a whole for a whole of society strategy. And one thing that we could do better as in conservation biology is better articulating the positive power of humanity. The things that humanity does for biodiversity that is actually doing well. This interdependency, that means that actually a lot of biodiversity, a lot of habitat, a lot of ecosystem have been created or maintained, and a lot of species behind it because of humanity. Having a narrative that positions us within that overall framework, I think really helps for connecting people and nature agenda. Admittedly, there will be some discussion about prioritization, monitoring need, institutional funding, how do you put more money into interdisciplinary. It's not something we haven't faced before, but I think that prioritization is something that will need to happen because money for those kind of things will go down. So if we're not clear and having some form of collective idea as to what we need to prioritize, should it be sometimes species, sometimes ecosystem, sometimes both, sometimes one, it might be helpful for pushing that agenda. One thing that has fascinated me working in rewilding and in conservation in general is that this is one of the countries with the less biodiversity on Earth. And then a lot of people don't really want to work in the UK. The interest for some ecosystem is significantly less than others. Take urban ecology and urban ecosystem. Many people don't even realize that urban ecosystem are a type of ecosystem. And when they are studied, they are not really studied like ecosystem. So there is quite a bunch of work to do into first being clear that nature matters everywhere. It's not as if there is a really cool, pristine nature and there is the trash nature, and you want to this one and not that one. And any kind of nature matters. A robin in a urban street can make a lot of people happy in the morning. So an agricultural system do not need to be completely deprived of biodiversity. So this ranking of ecosystem value, which I've really been confronted talking and engaging with rewilding, because rewilding is all about the wild, and what's the wild? And you have a lot of discussion as to what that is. But I don't think that this ranking of ecosystem value actually is helpful to engage with society as a whole. And then the other point is that all the assessment that we have, all the tools that we have developed, etc., is always for those pristine, far away, looking good ecosystem. And they all come from conservation biology in the sense that there is no framework right now to assess whether an agricultural ecosystem is working well or not, or is about to collapse. Because all the framework have been developed for ecosystems where there's as little human as possible. And we're going to need to bridge that gap. My final slide, promise. I think that the ecosystem science of tomorrow, they call for those, what we've called the boundary spanners. And these are those people that yes, can be really specialized in this stuff, but they're also interested in looking a bit of economics, a bit of philosophy, a bit of social sciences, those things, so that we can have those integration of different framework and understanding, which will not only strengthen our science, but also the science to policy pathway. A lot of those discussions when we go about aligning agenda, and yes, we need to bring things together, always come down to, as I was saying, ecosystem. But I don't want you to think for a minute that I think that the only solution is ecosystem. We're going to have to go well beyond place-based conservation. This is not just about nature-based solution. There is a lot of things we can do and that align agenda, and that doesn't require a specific action in a specific place. It might require policy change, land tenure right, financial incentive, etc. Another stuff that maybe we are not aware enough when we are dealing with policy, for those of us that want to, and supporting policy, is that there is a whole other group of people that are trying to coordinate action internationally, not through a convention and government, but literally through civic action. And these are called action agenda. Every single Rio Convention, so be the CBD, UNFCCC, and UNCCD, have those action agenda. But they are generally overlooked by scientists, over-studied, and not really supported. Yet, when you have countries like, I don't know, the US, going out, these are the type of platform that can still trigger movement and action, even though the government, as a party, has completely disengaged with it. And so I think we would do well in starting to engage with those platforms too. And then the final one is that if we are to break silos and advance stuff, etc., I think we need to bring the nature narrative beyond the nature people. I mean, we have a tendency to talk to us, among us, disagree a lot among us, actually, and then literally go to the nature people, such as Defra or the CBD. I think it's time to start to talk to DESNES, to the UNFCCC, to all those other places where we need nature to have a voice, and we're still not that good at doing that. There is still a lot of places where we don't go because we don't think we should. Actually, I would say that's definitely the place where we should go. And that's it. Thank you.